Clara stood before 100 of the territory's wealthiest, deadliest men and felt absolutely nothing. They puffed their chests. They jingled their silver spurs. Then, she pointed past them all, straight at a mud-soaked mountain man who was just trying to eat his stew in peace. "Him," she said. The Grand Hotel Saloon in Oakhaven smelled of floor wax, stale beer, and the sharp, nervous sweat of 100 men trying too hard. Clara Montgomery sat in a high-backed velvet chair that dug a wooden ridge into her spine. She kept her posture rigid. Her corset was laced tight enough to make her breath whistle faintly in her throat, a physical reminder of the trap she was in. Beside her stood her father, Arthur Montgomery. He was a man made of hard leather and cattle money, breathing heavily through his nose, smelling of expensive cigars and impending rage. "Pick one," Arthur had told her that morning, his voice a low gravel that brooked no argument. "The bank is hovering. The ranchers are circling like buzzards. You need a husband to anchor the deed, Clara. Pick one today, or I sell the entire herd to the Chicago Syndicate and we leave for Boston." Boston. The word tasted like ash. Clara belonged to the alkali dust and the rolling foothills. So, she sat in the velvet chair and watched the parade. It was a cattle call. That was the only word for it. The territory's most eligible bachelors had lined up out the swinging doors and down the muddy boardwalk, all of them eager to get their hands on the Montgomery Empire. Clara was just the key to the vault. She rejected the first 10 without speaking. A slight shake of her head. A blink of disinterest. There was the rail baron's son, smelling of rosewater and bay rum, his hands softer than hers. He looked at the saloon's cracked floorboards like they might infect him. Clara stared at his manicured fingernails and felt a wave of pure nausea. No. Then came the gunfighters, the men who wore their reputations like cheap cologne. They swaggered up to her chair, thumbs hooked in their gun belts, spurs clicking a practiced rhythm on the wood. One of them, a tall man with a thin mustache and dead eyes, offered her a tight smile that didn't reach above his cheekbones. He smelled like brass polish and old blood. He looked at her like she was a horse to be broken. No. By the 50th man, Clara's jaw ached from clenching it. The sheer weight of their performative masculinity was exhausting. They puffed out their chests. They spoke in deep, rumbling baritones that sounded forced. They promised her the world, promised to protect her, promised to tame the wild frontier in her name. They were all acting. Every single one of them was reciting lines from a play they thought she wanted to hear. It was suffocating. In the far back corner of the saloon, away from the brass chandeliers and the suffocating crowd, a man sat alone. Clara's eyes kept drifting to him, simply because he was the only moving thing in the room that wasn't trying to catch her attention. He was massive, but he didn't hold himself like a large man. He sat hunched over a small table near the potbelly stove, shivering slightly. Snow was melting off his heavy, knee-high moccasin boots, forming a dark puddle of dirty water on the floorboards. He wore a coat made of patched, mismatched animal hides, elk and bear, by the look of it stiff with dried mud and grease. He didn't smell like bay rum or cigar smoke. Even from across the room, Clara imagined he smelled like wet dog, wood smoke, and pine resin. He was eating a plate of beans and salt pork. He ate mechanically, his head down, the scrape of his tin spoon loud against the plate. His knuckles were raw, cracked, and bleeding slightly from the cold. He had a thick, unkempt beard and dark hair that hung in wet strands against his neck. He had come down from the high passes. A mountain man, a trapper who probably hadn't spoken to a human being in 6 months, seeking nothing more than salt, coffee, and a temporary thaw. He didn't know who she was. He didn't care about the Montgomery land. He just wanted the heat from the stove. "Pay attention, Clara," her father hissed, his heavy hand gripping her shoulder. Suitor number 99, a local rancher named Wyatt. He was handsome, in a rugged, predictable way. He owned 10,000 head of cattle and had a smile that he practiced in the mirror. "Miss Clara," Wyatt said, removing his Stetson and holding it over his heart, "I've admired you since we were children. Our lands border each other. It just makes sense. I'd treat you like a queen. I'd build you a house twice the size of this hotel." Clara looked at his boots. They were polished. Too polished. "No," she said softly. Wyatt's practiced smile slipped. revealing a flash of genuine ugliness. "Excuse me?" I said. "No, Wyatt. Put your hat back on. You're catching a draft." Arthur's grip on her shoulder became painful. "Clara, you are running out of options." "I am out of options, Father," she replied, her voice flat. "There isn't a real man in this room, just a bunch of little boys wearing their father's boots and playing with guns." The room went dead silent. The piano player, who had been softly picking out a tune, stopped mid-chord. 100 men stared at her, their egos collectively bruised, the atmosphere instantly turning hostile. The air grew thick, smelling suddenly of sour sweat and suppressed violence. The silence stretched, tight and brittle, as an overcranked watch spring. "You forget yourself, Clara," Arthur growled, his face flushing a deep, dangerous purple. He stepped in front of her, facing the crowd. "My daughter is tired. She has had a long day. She's a spoiled brat who needs to learn her place," muttered a voice from the back of the crowd. Clara stood up. The heavy rustle of her taffeta skirt sounded like a fire catching in dry brush. Her legs felt weak from sitting so long, but she locked her knees. She stepped around her father, ignoring his warning hiss. She looked at the sea of angry, offended faces. They didn't want her. They wanted to own her. They wanted to conquer her, just as they wanted to conquer the dirt and the rivers of Oakhaven. Her gaze bypassed the slicked-back hair and the tailored waistcoats. It cut straight to the back of the room, to the dirty corner by the stove. The mountain man had stopped eating. He was holding a piece of bread halfway to his mouth, staring at the crowd with a look of mild, detached annoyance. He just wanted them to stop yelling so he could finish his meal. Clara raised her hand. Her arm felt heavy, leaden with the weight of what she was about to do. Her finger extended. She pointed straight at the man in the animal hides. "I want him," she said. Her voice didn't shake. It rang clear and sharp over the stale air of the saloon. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes followed her pointing finger, landing on the muddy, bearded giant in the corner. The mountain man froze. He looked to his left. He looked to his right. He slowly lowered the piece of bread to his plate. He chewed the bite he had in his mouth, swallowed hard, and wiped his grease-stained mouth with the back of a scarred hand. "Me?" His voice was a rusty scrape, a sound that hadn't been used in a long time. It wasn't a booming baritone. It was rough, tired, and deeply confused. "Yes," Clara said. Her father grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "Have you lost your goddamn mind? That is a transient. A savage. He probably doesn't even have a pot to piss in. He's the only man here who isn't looking at me like I'm a piece of meat on a scale." Clara shot back, yanking her arm free. She began to walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted for her, some men stepping back in disgust, others in sheer shock. She stopped 3 feet from the mountain man's table. Up close, the smell of him was overwhelming. Wood smoke, wet wool, stale sweat, and the sharp, metallic tang of cold earth. He didn't stand up to greet her. He just sat there, looking up at her, with pale, slate-gray eyes. There was no awe in his expression, no greed, just a deep, bone-weary irritation. "I'm Clara Montgomery," she said. "Cole," he grunted. He didn't offer his hand. "Do you have a wife, Cole?" Cole let out a long, ragged breath. He rubbed a hand over his face, his calloused fingers scraping against his thick beard. "Lady, I came down from the ridges to buy 50 pounds of salt and some coffee beans. I don't want any trouble." "I am offering you a partnership," Clara said, keeping her voice low so only he could hear. "Half of the largest cattle spread in the territory. Food that isn't hardtack. A bed that isn't made of pine needles. All you have to do is stand next to me and pretend you give a damn." Cole stared at her. He saw the frantic, caged animal look in her eyes, hidden just beneath the icy exterior. He looked past her, at the 100 angry men, and then at her father, who looked ready to draw a pistol and shoot him simply for existing. "Seems to me," Cole said slowly, leaning back in his rickety wooden chair, "that standing next to you is a good way to get shot. Are you afraid of them?" Clara challenged, her chin lifting. It was the wrong thing to say. Cole didn't puff his chest. He didn't scowl. He just looked at her with a profound, terrifying emptiness. It was the look of a man who had fought off a starving grizzly with a hunting knife. A man who had frozen half to death in a blizzard and survived by eating his own pack mules. Before he could answer, Wyatt shoved his way to the front of the crowd. His face was twisted in an ugly sneer. "This is a joke," Wyatt spat. He looked down at Cole. "Get out of that chair, dirt trapper. The lady is having a breakdown. I won't have you insulting her honor by breathing her air." Cole didn't move. He kept his eyes on Clara. "You sure about this?" he asked her softly. "Yes," Clara breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Wyatt reached out, grabbing the collar of Cole's hide coat. "I said, get up." Wyatt didn't finish the sentence. Cole didn't stand up for a fair fight. He didn't challenge Wyatt to a duel in the street. He simply reacted with the brutal, unhesitating efficiency of a wild animal. Without leaving his chair, Cole pivoted his hips. His heavy, mud-caked moccasin shot upward, driving squarely into Wyatt's kneecap. The sound of the joint snapping was a wet, sickening crack that echoed through the silent saloon. Wyatt shrieked, his grip faltering as his leg gave out. As Wyatt pitched forward, Cole's hand darted out. He didn't throw a punch. He drove the rigid, calloused V of his hand directly into Wyatt's windpipe. It was over in less than 2 seconds. Wyatt collapsed to the sawdust-covered floor, gagging, clutching his ruined throat and shattered knee, writhing in silent agony. Cole hadn't even dropped his tin spoon. The saloon erupted. Men yelled, hands diving for holsters. Arthur Montgomery roared for the sheriff. Cole finally stood up. He was a head taller than anyone in the room. He didn't draw a weapon, but the sheer violent stillness radiating from him made half the room freeze in their tracks. He looked down at Wyatt, then up at Clara. "Well," Cole sighed, picking up his hat from the table and dusting it off against his thigh. "Guess I'm not getting that salt today." He looked at Clara. His gray eyes narrowed, assessing the chaos she had just dragged him into. He didn't look like a hero, saving a princess. He looked like a man who had stepped in a bear trap and was trying to figure out if he had to chew his own leg off to get free. "Let's go," Cole grunted, grabbing Clara by the elbow. His grip was like iron, his hands rough and hot against her skin. "Before they decide to string us both up." The alley behind the Grand Hotel smelled of frozen urine and rotting cabbage. Clara's lungs burned. She stumbled over the frozen ruts, her velvet slippers instantly soaking through with icy slush. Cole didn't slow down. He dragged her by the wrist, his stride eating up the distance to the livery stables at a brutal pace. "Let go. You're hurting me," she gasped, digging the heels of her ruined shoes into the mud. Cole stopped. He didn't turn around gracefully. He stopped like a draft horse hitting the end of a tether, yanking her forward so hard she crashed into his chest. It was like hitting a wall of wet timber. "You want to go back in there?" he asked. His voice was a low rasp, barely carrying over the wind whistling between the clapboard buildings. He pointed a scarred thumb back toward the saloon. The muffled shouts of angry men were bleeding through the walls. "You think that boy's daddy is going to let you walk away after I crushed his kid's windpipe?" Clara looked back. Panic, cold and sharp as swallowed glass, finally pierced her adrenaline. "No." "Then keep your feet moving." He practically threw her into the gloom of the livery. The air inside was thick with the smell of sweet hay, manure, and warm animal bodies. Cole bypassed the sleek thoroughbreds and carriage horses. He moved straight to a massive, ugly roan gelding that pinned its ears back and snapped its yellow teeth at him. Cole punched the horse squarely in the neck. The animal grunted, shook its massive head, and stood still for the saddle. "Get up," Cole ordered, tossing a heavy burlap sack over the horse's rump. "I can't ride astride in this," Clara said, clutching the yards of heavy, rust-colored taffeta. "It's impossible." Cole didn't argue. He didn't offer a gentle hand. He grabbed her by the waist. His massive hands spanned her ribs, the pressure bruising even through the whalebone corset. He hoisted her off the ground and unceremoniously dumped her over the saddle horn like a sack of feed. The fabric of her skirt caught on the silver concho of the saddle. With a loud, sickening rip, the expensive silk tore from hem to thigh. The freezing air bit violently into her exposed skin. Clara gasped, tears of sheer humiliation springing to her eyes. Before she could right herself, Cole vaulted up behind her. He didn't wrap his arms around her waist like a romantic savior. He grabbed the reins, his forearms bracketing her, hard and unyielding as iron bars. He spurred the roan. The horse lunged forward, nearly snapping Clara's neck back against Cole's shoulder. They hit the street just as the saloon doors burst open. Men spilled into the mud, shouting, drawing revolvers. "Hold on," Cole grunted. He didn't draw a gun. He leaned low, forcing Clara to fold over the saddle horn. The horse tore down the main thoroughfare, hooves throwing heavy clods of frozen mud. A gunshot cracked. The sound was flat and dry in the cold air. Something slapped the wooden facade of the butcher shop to their left, showering them in splinters. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. She couldn't scream. Her corset, cinched tight for the parlor, was turning into a garret around her ribs. Every crushing stride of the heavy horse slammed the wooden busk into her sternum. She couldn't draw a full breath. Black spots danced in her vision, violently swirling with the brown and gray of the rushing town. They hit the open plains, leaving the shouts and the gun smoke behind. Cole didn't slow down. He ran the roan hard for 2 miles, cutting off the main road and plunging into the dense, thorny brush of the foothills. The wind howled off the snow-capped peaks, slicing through Clara's ruined dress. When he finally pulled back on the reins, they were deep in a rocky ravine, shrouded by ancient, twisting scrub oaks. The horse was lathered, its breath pluming in great white clouds. Cole dismounted first, dropping into the snow with a heavy crunch. He didn't reach up for her. He busied himself, checking the horse's legs, his face hidden beneath the brim of his greasy hat. Clara tried to swing her leg over. Her limbs felt like dead wood. She slid off the saddle, her boots hitting the frozen ground. Her knees immediately buckled. She collapsed into the dirt, coughing violently. Her lungs were screaming for air, but the corset held them in an iron vise. She clawed at the throat of her dress, her perfectly manicured fingernails tearing at the lace. She was suffocating. She was actually suffocating. Cole turned around at the sound of her ragged, high-pitched gasping. He watched her struggle in the dirt for 3 long seconds. His expression didn't change. It remained a mask of profound, tired inconvenience. He walked over, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. He drew a hunting knife from his belt. The blade was 8 inches long, stained dark near the hilt, and honed to a razor edge. Clara flinched, her eyes widening in terror as he knelt over her. "Turn around," he said. She couldn't speak. She shook her head, terrified. Cole sighed. It was a deeply human sound, full of exhaustion. He grabbed her by the shoulder and roughly rolled her onto her stomach. Clara whimpered, waiting for the blade to bite into her back. Instead, she felt the cold, flat steel slide down the spine of her dress. Cole didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. With one brutal, upward sawing motion, he sliced through the heavy silk, the cotton chemise, and the thick leather laces of the corset. The pressure released with an audible snap. Clara took a breath. It was a loud, ugly, tearing sound as her lungs expanded to their full capacity for the first time in 12 hours. She curled into a ball in the dirty snow, weeping silently, not from sadness, but from the raw, biological relief of oxygen hitting her blood. Cole wiped the blade on his thigh and sheathed it. He tossed a dirty, wool blanket over her shivering shoulders. It smelled overpoweringly of wet dog and old sweat, but it trapped the heat. "You're bleeding," she managed to say, her voice hoarse. She pointed a trembling finger at his knuckles. They were split open and sluggishly oozing thick, dark blood from where he had punched Wyatt's throat. Cole looked down at his hand like it belonged to someone else. He wiped the blood on his hide coat. "It'll stop." He walked to the creek, broke the thin layer of ice with his heel, and filled a battered canteen. He walked back and dropped it in the dirt beside her. "Why'd you pick me?" he asked, his gray eyes boring into hers. There was no vanity in the question, just suspicion. Clara pulled the stinking blanket tighter around her shoulders. Her beautiful, expensive dress hung off her in shredded ribbons. She looked up at him, her face smeared with mud and tears. "Because you didn't want me," she said, her voice shaking. "Every man in that room looked at me and saw a bank ledger. They wanted to own me. You just wanted a plate of beans." Cole stared at her. A muscle ticked in his jaw. The wind rattled the dry oak branches above them. "I still don't want you," he said. It wasn't cruel. It was just a fact, delivered as flatly as a weather report. Clara nodded slowly. A strange, bitter smile touched the corner of her mouth. "Good. That means we understand each other." They rode until the sky bruised purple and black. Cole led them to a rotting line shack on the territory's edge. Inside, it smelled of mouse droppings, dry rot, and ancient ash. He kicked the door shut, ignoring its busted hinges, and shaved kindling into the rusted stove. Soon, a smoky fire popped in its iron belly. Clara sat on a splintered crate. She shivered violently, her teeth clicking together. "They'll come," she whispered to his broad back. "My father, Wyatt's men. They won't let the deed go." Cole sat in the dirt, leaning against the drafty wall. He pulled a Winchester from its scabbard and began thumbing heavy brass cartridges into the loading gate. Click, clack. "I know," he grunted. "You don't have to stay," she said, the suffocating reality of her actions settling in. "Head up the pass. I'll say you forced me." Cole paused. The firelight caught the exhausted hollows of his cheeks. "I broke a man's knee and kidnapped a cattle heiress. If I run, I'm looking over my shoulder forever." He laid the rifle across his knees. "We wait." An hour past dark. Horses crunched over the frozen mud outside. A lantern swung wildly in the grimy window frame. "Clara!" Arthur Montgomery's voice tore through the wind. Cole didn't flinch. He kicked the door open and stepped onto the sagging porch. Arthur sat on his gelding, leveling a shotgun. Beside him huddled a nervous deputy and Judge Miller, shivering in his wool coat. "Step away from her, you animal," Arthur commanded, racking the shotgun. The metallic sound echoed off the pines. Cole didn't raise his rifle. He held it loose, barrel angled down, but his thumb rested heavily on the hammer. "You shoot me, old man. My finger flinches on this trigger. You'll catch a .44 slug in the gut before I hit the dirt. Takes 3 days to die like that." Clara stepped out. The ruined silk whipped around her legs. She was mud-stained and freezing, but her spine remained rigid. "The deed is anchored if I marry a territory resident," she yelled over the howling wind, looking at the cowering judge. "Miller, marry us, now." "Clara, stop this madness!" Arthur roared, raising the shotgun higher. Cole moved. He didn't aim. He simply brought the Winchester up from the hip and fired. The muzzle flash strobed blinding orange in the pitch black. The bullet shattered the lantern on Arthur's saddle horn. Kerosene exploded into the snow. The horse reared, screaming, and Arthur dropped the shotgun to fight the reins. Cole worked the lever. He aimed dead at Arthur's chest. The lady asked for a wedding. He rumbled, smelling of fresh ozone and gun smoke. "Accommodator." Judge Miller stammered through the vows in the freezing dark. "I do," Clara said. Cole looked at her. He saw the feral, terrifying light in her eyes. She wasn't a princess. She had just burned her own kingdom down. "I do," he grunted. Arthur spat into the snow, wheeled his horse, and vanished into the night with his men. Cole picked up Arthur's shotgun, emptied the shells into his pocket, and turned to Clara. He didn't say anything romantic. He just grabbed the edges of her dirty hide blanket and pulled it tight beneath her chin to block the wind. His scarred knuckles brushed her freezing jaw. "Fire's dying," he said, turning back inside. Clara stood in the dark. She was freezing, married to a stranger, and entirely ruined. But as she took a deep breath of the sharp, icy air, she realized something. The corset was gone. For the first time in her life, she could breathe perfectly. And that's how you anchor a deed with a shotgun wedding. Clara just traded a velvet cage for a mud-stained reality. But something tells me Cole is exactly the kind of trouble she needs. What did you think of their unromantic, gritty standoff? If you loved this deeply human take on the Wild West, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more raw, unapologetic storytelling. See you in the next one.